With the inevitable departure of LeBron James, the Los Angeles Lakers have officially begun centering their team around Luka Doncic, and while the Lakers have already done so in the past, where LeBron was more so a third option, this exit from James does seemingly mark a new chapter in LA, notwithstanding the current ownership issues the team is facing as well. So, as Luka Doncic enters his 9th season in the NBA, he seemingly will be approaching his peak at age 27 now, which is the birth of a typical prime for an NBA star. And so with that in mind, everything that GM Rob Pelinka and his staff does going forward, and what they have already done, should be directed around maximizing the precious time frame of an all-time player's prime. And after being eliminated in the second round via sweep to the Oklahoma City Thunder this past season, it's clear that the Lakers need to look towards improving structural issues within the roster to build a true title contender. So coming into this most recent offseason, the Lakers had a lot of moving parts and a lot of free agent decisions to make. And so with that being said, let's look into how they proceeded to build their team for the next season. So first, let's look at some notable departures from LA this offseason. Starting off with LeBron James, it ultimately makes sense to let him search for other situations if you're LA, and of course he found his home in Philadelphia. And although the Lakers didn't get any value from his departure, with no sign and trade options available, it's certainly passable as a move because you can't really trade LeBron James midseason, of course, and you still want to maintain the relationship with Rich Paul and the rest of the Clutch Sports family. Something that I think that goes extremely underrated in the media surrounding the NBA, especially when it comes to the offseason, is that people seem to go without recognizing the impact that player relationships have on a front office and a team. If the Lakers were completely heavy set on trading LeBron last season when it was clear they wouldn't get any value out of him, or they were set on giving some mechanism to sign and trade him, that would be something that ruins a relationship with Clutch and eliminates any chance for them to have Clutch guys in the future. And so ending on good terms with LeBron, I would say, is certainly a plus for the Lakers front office because it opens the door for other Clutch clients down the line. Now, parting ways with Marcus Smart and losing him to the Houston Rockets is one thing that appeared like a loss initially until they replaced his playmaking defense across various players, which I will eventually discuss. Especially since Marcus Smart is on the decline as he ages, I think that the Lakers were right to not give a contract competitive with the Rockets' 2-year non-taxpayer mid-level exception offer. Smart's three-point efficiency took a small dip last season, and it's likely that their best option for Smart could include the same deal with a team option to assess this relative decline. However, I think the Lakers were also prudent to target other players that may be a better fit around Luka Doncic with that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. For example, I think the Lakers could have used this to attract Luke Kennard, who signed for essentially the same contract with the Phoenix Suns, with small dollar amount differences since the Suns do pay the luxury tax. It's especially noteworthy that the Lakers acquired Kennard in exchange for Gabe Vincent and a second-round pick during this most recent trade deadline. As opposed to Smart, Luke Kennard's elite spacing, movement shooting, and collective playmaking pairs extremely well next to Luka Doncic, so in order to let him go after pursuing him just months earlier, they would have to value their mid-level signing quite highly. It's assumed that Luke Kennard likely would have been willing to return for a similar deal, just for the sake of this video, to the Lakers, since they provide a better lifestyle in LA and a better opportunity to win in LA as opposed to in Phoenix. Luke Kennard is a career 45% three-point shooter, which of course is extremely impressive, and nobody that the Lakers brought in rivals this level of production. In my opinion, it would likely have been wise for the Lakers to prioritize Kennard in free agency, particularly because the importance of spacing when it comes to playoff time, and particularly, once again, when you have a heliocentric basketball player like Luka Doncic. His ability to create on ball and dominate the basketball for most of the possession means that the Lakers need to have low usage, high efficiency shooters like Luke Kennard in order to be play finishers. Similarly to how an effective pick and roll partner for Luka Doncic can have efficient rim efficiency, Luke Kennard is someone who can stretch the floor and provide effective shooting. Now, moving on to Rui Hachimura, Based on the fact that Rui joined the Clippers just across town amidst other suitors, it's clear that it's at least highly likely he would have joined the Lakers had they given him a competitive offer to the 2-year, $30 million full non-taxpayer MLE the Clippers gave. Another great spacer and fit around Luka Doncic, shooting nearly 40%. Rui is another player that I would have wanted to keep around the Lakers locker room. Especially for continuity's sake, having Hachimura return for his 5th year with the organization would have provided important intangibles to the program and someone who day in and day out seems to know what the Lakers are all about. And of course, I'm not with the Lakers on a daily basis, so I don't know exactly what goes on in the locker room, but I would assume he's at least respected enough on the team to not be a strong negative in that locker room. Nonetheless, the ability to make simple plays and hit catch-and-shoot jumpers, in my opinion, is sufficient for an effective win piece next to Luka, and I wouldn't see why they didn't offer him a competitive offer, and I would have prioritized him similarly to Luke Kennard over some of the players they may have brought in free agency. Moving on to DeAndre Ayton. The Lakers traded Ayton to the Wizards in exchange for Jaden Hardy and a second-round pick in 2031 and 2032, clearing up around $2 million in cap space as well. From my personal perspective, Ayton's lack of motor and poor shot diet of face-up jumpers is extremely frustrating for someone who would like to see the former number 1 overall pick become an effective role player in this league, and it seemed that next to Luka Doncic, he would have the perfect opportunity to showcase that. And since it's likely that, given what we saw from the film, that he's not willing to change his play style for Luka in the winning situation he would have had in LA, he had to go in exchange for centers who are willing to fit in next to Luka. And the center position is probably the most important for building a winner around Luka, as evidenced by Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively in Dallas. And so the Lakers, in my opinion, were right to pursue other players in this instance. However, given their free agency signings, I would expect them to possibly look to flip Hardy now, who's on a cheap contract, which honestly I would likely not recommend. Since Hardy has a pre-existing history of success around Luka Doncic, giving him some opportunities at least throughout the season as a secondary creator would be wise to assess if that chemistry translates to LA. And if it doesn't, since the Lakers seem to be pressed thin with trade assets, I would consider him someone they might look to move on for a player who's more willing to fit in and more willing to be in a winning situation. So Jackson Hayes is the sacrificial lamb of the Walker Kessler signing. Despite his somewhat controversial status, I think he'd be relatively well-fitting as a backup center in LA, and he's already evidenced it. Especially since he switched his nationality to Slovenia, my assumption is that his chemistry and friendship with Luka Doncic is particularly strong and would likely only continue to improve as time goes on. Notably, Hayes shot an impressive 75% from the field, and that type of offensive efficiency is always needed. Even if his defensive acumen isn't the most lauded in the NBA, having that level of field goal percentage as a backup center is something that would be very desirable for any team and likely should have been desirable in LA. Simply put, however, an efficient roller who knows his place next to Luka is an optimal fit, and the Lakers lost that. Now, of course, they had to get rid of him because they brought in somebody, and the contract he ended up signing with the Utah Jazz probably wasn't good enough for the Lakers, considering they made some more moves for centers who would go for a little cheaper contracts. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that, in my opinion, losing Jackson Hayes is significant and noteworthy. Now, before we discuss who's made their way into the Lakers roster this offseason, I want to take a brief aside to discuss the type of team that I believe would best fit around Luka. Using the 2024 Mavericks Finals roster as a case study, players such as Derrick Jones Jr., PJ Washington, Dante Exum, Josh Green, and Dwight Powell all played key roles in the finals run. Moreover, role players such as Tim Hardaway Jr. all saw elevated efficiency and impact next to Luka. And the question to me is why and what qualities did they possess that allowed them to create a winning situation in Dallas? To me, it seems that the best players that maximize Luka's impact are players who know their roles and try to work off the immense gravity that Luka possesses. Considering all of the names I just threw out there, another thing is interesting to wonder. Since these guys were all undervalued assets, with a great example being Derrick Jones Jr., who started in the finals and yet signed for a minimum contract at the end of the offseason, what exactly leads to these assets flourishing in Dallas? It's the gravity of Luka Doncic. And if you have a player similarly to Derrick Jones Jr. or Tim Hardaway Jr. who can shoot it off the catch as soon as he gets it, those are types of guys that know their role and are willing to put what it takes to win, and they're willing to regress in terms of their overall shot diet in order to maximize Luka. And Luka in turn maximizes them ultimately. And so the defensive acumen as well, I would say, is valued in order to best mitigate Luka Doncic's lack thereof. And so players, in my opinion, that fit next to Luka are ones with strong catch and shoot numbers, as they can provide the requisite spacing to make Luka's isolation and pick and roll actions possible and effective. Lastly, once again, as evidenced by Derrick Jones Jr.'s ascension from a veteran minimum player to a starter on a finals team, elite athleticism is also important for a Luka running mate. So starting off with Walker Kessler, after a strong start to last season where he had an impressive and exorbitant 75% field goal percentage from 3 through the first 5 games, Walker Kessler showcased the potential to be an elite center prospect next to Luka Doncic. Before tearing his labrum, he served as an elite rim protector and even showcased some chops as a perimeter defender as well, getting active hands and grabbing 1.4 steals per game. Now, ignoring both what the Lakers gave up for Kessler and the size of his contract, plus the worry of future injury, an effective pick and roll scorer who can possibly pop for an open 3 and defend the rim is precisely the type of player the Lakers should have been pursuing to be a third option next to Luka and Reeves. However, considering the market for players of this ilk, it is understandable that they would have to give up so much. Kessler signed for a 4-year contract with an average value of around $32 million, or 8% of the salary cap per year, which, unfortunately, is comparable to players such as Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Julius Randle, and Jalen Johnson. Of course, while it would have been unlikely that the Lakers could and possibly should have pursued players of that archetype, they are still paying a hefty price for what will likely, at the very best, end up being a sub-all-star quality role player. However, I'm not as frustrated with this price as the NBA media seems to be, especially since it's evidenced by guys like Derek Lively and even Clint Capella's example with James Harden in the past. The center position has a heightened importance with these heliocentric guards. What does concern me rather than the value of the contract is the package that came in exchange with the Utah Jazz giving up Kessler in return for his rights in this sign-and trade. The Lakers sent unprotected picks in 2031 and 2033 and swapped best rights in 28 and 30. And so this essentially means that the Lakers are locked in with their core and have no real outlet or recourse to improve unless they can squeeze value out of a player who may see an improved role over the course of the season or in their tenure with the Lakers. Still, with the lack of picks and a major portion of the roster on short-term contracts, the Lakers will likely have to bank on nailing minimum signings year after year and stay competitive each season under this core. And I guess that's just a risk that they will have to take. So I would say that Quentin Grimes is probably the most perplexing signing that the Lakers made, in my opinion, this offseason. Now, I know they see a vision for him to upgrade his role and be a great tertiary ball handler and a great defender, but at just 6'4", I'm a little worried about him being a small forward for them. And he did play a lot of regular season games, which is certainly a positive, averaging almost 14 points and 3.5 assists per game. But his three-point percentage at 33.4 seems a little lackluster to me. However, I would say also that he had a lot more on-ball creation that he needed to do in Philly as opposed to what I expect him to do in LA, so maybe that will go up. But nonetheless, I think since he's not that big for a wing option, they're likely to start him and not very efficient, I am a little concerned. And I wonder what leverage he had with them as well. They gave him a 2-year deal plus the 1-year player option for 8% of the cap. And I wonder what the negotiations were like, because I think they could have gotten away with giving him less. So after Kessler, I would say that the Lakers signing of Colin Sexton is likely their second most important signing. They signed him for a 1-year plus 1-year player option deal amounting to 5% of the total salary cap. And on first glance, I was a little shocked to see that this happened, especially considering the fact that they brought in Jaden Hardy and then already have Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, two very notable high-volume playmakers who demand to have the ball most of the time. And while Colin Sexton seemingly is one of those types of players, the way I'm starting to think of it now is that it was a cheap deal that has someone who is overperforming their contract. Last season, Colin Sexton played 68 games and averaged 15.5 points on 48% from the field, 40 overall, and 85% from the line. And while he's not quite the defender he seemed to be in college, Colin Sexton is still a hyper-efficient scorer who can also eat up a lot of the regular season when Luka Doncic most likely has some injuries or some load management situations. And so I think that's a big positive of Colin Sexton, albeit I'm not sure from a playoff perspective if I'm coming around to this signing quite as much, because I don't know if he actually has the standard of effort and defensive acumen required for a championship contending team. However, one thing I do think is notable for this Colin Sexton signing is that he could be a potential trade chip. Like I was saying, there are some players that on the Lakers that might get traded for picks or what have you in order to give them a little more flexibility going forward, and I easily think he could be one of them. Perhaps I could see them packaging Colin Sexton with maybe another player such as Jaden Hardy in exchange for a wing that's possibly on a small expiring or something of that nature to try to improve the roster. But from a pure basketball standpoint, I think, of course, there are some drawbacks, but the positives for Wall, I assume they have him in the regular season, will be definitely valuable. So I think it's safe to say that the Lakers certainly value Sandro Mamukelashvili as someone who will be a part of their long-term core. Looking at their cap books, their projected starting five of Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, Walker Kessler, Quentin Grimes, and now Mamu, all are under contract until the 29-30 year, in which all four of them, apart from Luka, have a player option. And so, thinking about what Mamu could potentially bring to the Lakers, my first concern was that he's somewhat of a tweener position. He's 6'9", and that is relatively undersized for a 5, and I would say he's also not necessarily the strong rebounder that I would expect in a starting center. And I also would say he's not quite a power forward either. Now, since they do have Walker Kessler, the center position is a little less needed. But from a power forward's perspective, I think, he's someone who doesn't quite have the movement to be able to keep up with, for example, a Josh Hart or an OG Anunoby or any of those types of wings. And then when you consider that their back line will be Quentin Grimes, Luka Doncic, and Austin Reeves, he's going to need to step up as a defender. And so one thing with Mamu that is going to be a perfect fit right in is that, he has connective playmaking and doesn't quite need the ball. He shot almost 40% from deep last season with the Toronto Raptors and once again played 80 games. And so this is something that Rob Pelinka and his staff are likely seeming to value, which is durability. And so pairing once again next to Luka, who's not the most durable, I can see value in this signing. And since he has been steadily improving as a spacer and a shooter and, is 27 years old, so it's tough to see exactly where the projection will go from here, he has been improving, which is definitely promising. And next to Luka, I'm sure he'll have many corner three opportunities. So I'm not indifferent about the Mamu signing. I would have hoped they signed for someone who's more of a 4/3 instead of a 4/5 type of tweener. But for what the market was, I would say it's a passable grade. So I already touched on Jaden Hardy a decent amount in this video, but just to speak on him briefly, one thing that I would like to point out is that he shot nearly 40% from three this season, and so once again I would expect that to go up, especially since he has great chemistry with Luka Doncic, and Luka Doncic is one of the ultimate floor raisers in the league, and given that he shot around that length in pretty damaged situations in Dallas and in Washington, this is something that will certainly be a positive going forward. And since he was just a throw-in in the DeAndre Ayton deal, I think it's a guard worthy of taking a chance on at a young age and a relatively cheap price as well. So Baylor wing Cameron Carr was somebody who I was going to make a draft video on, and I had him 10th on my overall big board. And he's someone that fell to 24 to the Lakers, and I immediately considered them a winner of the draft. because I think that he's one of the most undervalued assets in that entire class, especially since he averaged 19 points per game at Baylor and shot nearly 50, 40, 80. As a 6'5 wing with a massive wingspan, I really can appreciate what he could possibly add as a role player with the Lakers. He showed some on-ball creation last year in his new situation being Baylor, and I wonder if in his bench minutes he can be a go-to scorer as well. And even if he can't, I think his prowess as a shooter and his connective defense ability is something that the Lakers will obviously value. And since he also played decently well in Summer League, I would expect him to be involved at least to some capacity from the start with LA. Alright, so I'm going to briefly touch on 3 other minimum signings that the Lakers made. So the first is Zaire Williams, who in last season with the Brooklyn Nets averaged around 10 points per game and shot nearly 34% from 3. And so as a 6'9 wing and one of the guys who will seemingly be a reserve with this team, I don't mind that they took a swing on him, especially since he was pretty well regarded as the 10th pick in the draft, just in the 2021 draft, so not too long ago, and he's only 24 years old as well. So there is a lot to be interested in with Zaire Williams, and he was a blue chip prospect, so I don't mind taking the swing, thinking about what he could add when they already have pretty short wings. So, secondly, I think Kevon Looney is another one of those minimum signings, and in my opinion is probably the one who might play the most. Looney is someone who was the backup in New Orleans last season and is now coming in for LA, who will likely be playing behind Kessler and Jared Vanderbilt. But given Jared Vanderbilt's injury history, it is good that they went to attract a third center, someone with championship experience and someone who, similarly to a lot of the guys the Lakers have signed, know their role and is willing to be a roller next to Luka Doncic. So I think that's a fine signing, and I have no worries there as their minimum guy. Moving on to their last minimum, Matisse Thybulle is another one that they're seemingly taking a chance on here as a wing who can defend and shoot nearly 40% from deep. I also think I could see Matisse Thybulle playing some big minutes for them, but with the Portland Trailblazers, he started to fall out of the rotation. He's nearly 30 years old and is not quite the player we saw once in Philadelphia. However, I do like the idea of him fitting next to Luka Doncic, but nonetheless, all of these guys are players that the team is taking a chance on here, and with that minimum contract, it'd be tough for them to really make a splash there. So it could be a lot worse for them. Now, really briefly before we close today, I'd like to also move on to players who signed for similar deals that I might have targeted if I were the Lakers. I think one that stands out to me more than any is Jet Howard, who ended up signing with the Dallas Mavericks on a two-way spot. If he had interest from the Lakers, I'm not aware of it, but seeing him go for a two-way was at least a little shocking to me, given that I think he was the 11th pick in the 2023 NBA draft, which is not too long ago. But for a two-way, I think he would be a great wing for the Lakers to take a chance on, who is a little bit taller than Matisse Thybulle, and while he doesn't offer the defensive acumen, certainly offers that kind of spark plug shooting. But I would probably also go for him on a two-way over Zaire Williams, and I just think he would give a great opportunity. Ariel Hukporti signed for the minimum in Philly, and I think he'd be a better backup center than probably Kevon Looney and Jared Vanderbilt. And so since he's already the third stringer in Philly behind, or actually he'll be the second string now behind Joel Embiid, I think the Lakers could have attracted him. Keon Ellis is someone that I think would have been someone worthy of pursuing, especially since he's been a great role player and he's shown that in Sacramento as well as in Cleveland. I think the Lakers could have probably pried him away from the Nets. I don't know exactly what he'd be looking to provide for them, but I think with the Lakers he'd give winning basketball. Tim Hardaway Jr. signed for mid-level with Miami, and I think he probably just valued that opportunity, but I also would have given him some consideration. Colin Gillespie re-signed with the Suns, and while they already do have effective guard play, I think for that mid-level spot, maybe over some of the guys they got, he would have been worth a look. And then unsigned players that I might have pursued for that last one over, over maybe a Thibault or a Zaire Williams. I think Ochai Agbaji is a name that could be interesting, as with Bruce Brown and Nick Richards. And then possible trade targets that I would have pursued if I were LA are one, Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, although I doubt Oklahoma City would have given them to another Western Conference contender, judging by their strict strategy with trading to Atlanta, who holds the Spurs pick. I would have looked for Jamal Cain maybe as a trade candidate, who plays for Orlando, signed with a minimum. Big wing who has athleticism and shooting. I wonder if Moussa Diabate would have been a cheaper option to get than Walker Kessler, but I kind of doubt that Charlotte would want to let him go. Julian Strawther maybe could have used a couple second rounders that they got from the Jaden Hardy to acquire him into cap space. And then Cam Spencer and Javon Small, I think, are also some targets. And so essentially, while they didn't have much to work with, I'm not sure how well these pieces are going to fit together, and I'm not certain they'll fit together better than they did last year around Luka. But I'd like for them to try and make some changes throughout the regular season and over the next few years to maximize this championship window. And with that in mind, though, they still have, limited flexibility with guys on long deals that you'd probably want to trade on short deals and guys on short deals that you might want on long deals. And they have a lack of draft picks as well. So for that front office, it's going to be difficult to improve, but I think the team they have now is an adequate contender for the NBA Finals, especially considering that, it seems to be that the league is wide open every year. So for the Lakers, I wish them nothing but the best.